Well, hello and welcome to the Practitioner Podcast, a podcast from us at Renaissance, a network of missional practitioners and microchurches in the greater Boston area. Every episode of this podcast, we talk about themes around living on mission and living in microchurch community. Our conversations always touch on the practical, the realities of everyday, ordinary people. This is because our mission is about cultivating beautiful kingdom people embedded in the everyday stuff of life. As many of you know, my name is Drew Thurman. I'm one of our team members at Renaissance. I'm typically joined by Christine Lee, and she is still not with us. I think she just got back from Australia, dealing with some jet lag as we speak. She's got some more work trips coming up, but we're already planning the next episode when she's going to get back. But in the meantime, we have a couple of interviews that we're going to be doing. We've just had one already. We've got a couple more coming up. This episode, we're going to be interviewing Beth Wolf. She is a pastor in the Clarksburg, Maryland area, just outside of Washington, D.C. I first met Beth a few years ago in the Forge America world, talking about missional conversations about what does it look like for the church to live beyond the walls. And I've always just really appreciated her voice. She's an amazing speaker and teacher. Every time she talks, I think everybody wants to listen. And she's just very honest and real. I look up to her in a number of ways because of it. And it's because of that, a couple of years ago, it was a huge honor to get to ask her to be on our board at Renaissance. She's actually been head of the board the last couple of years and has, from afar, spoken in so many important ways into who Renaissance has become. We wouldn't really be where we are today without her voice and some of her leadership. But this episode, we're going to be talking about what she's doing in her neighborhood, which is really unique. And I think you're going to hear in her story a little bit about the grittiness and the difficulty that being a practitioner involves. Sometimes it's really easy for us to glamorize the missional life, only to find out when we do it that is far more difficult than we might have thought. And the victories are far smaller than we anticipated. And so she's going to describe her story and what to do with that. And what does it look like to really engage God beyond the walls in ways that we might not have ever expected. No matter where you're at, whether or not you're a microchurch leader, you're just trying to live life in your neighborhood, or maybe you're not a part of our network and you're just tuning in, I think you're going to love what she has to say. We're going to get to that interview right after the break with Beth Wolf. Well, as I said at the top of the show, I am so excited to be joined by Beth Wolf, who is on our board at Renaissance, and who I just admire for what she's doing in Clarksburg. So, Beth, how are you doing?
I'm doing good today, Drew. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for the time. Well, I before this, I gave an intro and talked a little bit about who you are and just getting to meet you, a few of the projects we've worked on together and how you've been a part of our board, but did probably a lousy job talking about who you are. So we're always better about talking about ourselves than someone else's. So I would love for you to just briefly tell us about yourself, and then just how did you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, happy to do that. So I currently live in Clarksburg, Maryland. So we're about 18 miles outside of the DC area. So that shapes a lot. My location in Clarksburg shapes a lot of what I do. But I'm a pastor at Clarksburg Church. I've been there for about 10 years. I am married to my husband, Zach. We've got two girls who are both teenagers, and we have two dogs that are very valuable members of our family. But I got involved in the church at Clarksburg. I had been a part of a church plant when I was in college, grew up in the church, so that also shapes a lot of my context and how that sort of shaped what I'm doing now. But before we came to Clarksburg, I was in a larger church in Phoenix, and I was doing student ministry. And if I'm honest, I was pretty successful at doing the student ministry in that larger church. I was pretty good. They kept handing me more and more responsibilities, and hey, will you take on children's ministry? Will you also, oversee the adult discipleship? Will you, all of that kind of stuff. So, but I just had this feeling that God was just calling me to a different vision of the church than just programs for people who were already inside the building of the church. And And I remember, I think I was reading like a manifesto of missiology by David Bosch or whatever. I love David Bosch, but he's one of the lines, I still remember it. He said that the church is the only organization that exists for its non-members, which was really a hard pill to swallow because in the context of church that I was currently serving in, we only existed for our members. I mean, there was like a budget line item for those people who were outside the church, but like all the programming, if you looked at our time allotment as a staff and funding and everything, we were existing for our members. And I remember I was actually on a phone call with one of my mentors, and I had heard God sort of speak internally to me and just ask the question, like, are you ready to stop building your kingdom and start participating in mine? And I was just like, what? How dare you? I have given the past however many years of my life to your, like, I have sacrificed everything to build your kingdom. And I just really felt like God was just like, no, you're really building your name. You're really building your kingdom. If you wanted to participate in my kingdom, like, are you ready? And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I was willing to say yes. So, in that moment, I think it was then that Zach and I started to have this conversation about, like, what does it look like to leave the place that we had established in Phoenix and to let God call us into something different. And we didn't really know what that was going to look like. Because it's kind of outside the story of this whole thing, God did a really cool thing where he very clearly spoke to me and my husband through a surprise phone call and a clothes washing machine repairman and a tree that had a tree house in it that we were supposed to move to Phoenix, or supposed to move from Phoenix to Maryland. And then I began the question. I took the church that we came to in Maryland was a church restart. So it had existed in a different context, in a building that was in Rockville, which is kind of, it's really about 10 miles south of Clarksburg, but in DC, 10 miles, like that could be an hour of traffic. So like, 10 miles is significant. So, they had been in Rockville when they were first planted in like 1929, and then they moved to Clarksburg. They sold their building with the dream of being bigger and better, that they could have a bigger space and do more ministry. And so they sold their building. But the problem is that all the church members continued to live in Rockville. So they stayed there, and then they would commute up to Clarksburg on Sunday mornings, and then they would leave Clarksburg and go back down to Rockville. So no one really ever got to know Clarksburg. No one knew anything about Clarksburg. It was just the physical location of their building gathering space. So however many years went by after they moved to Clarksburg, maybe 15 or 20 years went by, and all of their children had grown up and gone away. And they were kind of left with about 20 elderly people who really couldn't sustain the building financially or physically. And so they were faced with this thing of like shut their doors or merge with another church to try to create new life. And so they actually did this beautiful thing of self-sacrifice, of just laying down their assets and the keys and all that stuff, and were willing to let go of doing church any way that they had known before in order to see their church be alive, which I think is a key part of positioning yourself for doing missional work, is sort of, I'm willing to let go of everything that I value, everything that is important to me, and begin and use whatever I have to serve the kingdom of God. So that's sort of where it began, and that's where I came in. The church that they had merged with said, "Hey, we're gonna let you live as a separate congregation. You're not tied to like us as a satellite campus or anything. We'll do the backbone financial, governance and things like that." But then they were the ones who called me to then be the lead pastor of this church in Clarksburg. And so then began the journey of trying to figure out how do we not just have a missions department, How do we not just have a missional Sunday? How do we not just have a missional sermon series? But how do we orient our entire congregation on this concept of being, of participating in God's mission to proclaim and demonstrate that the kingdom is here on earth. So that's how I got there. And that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years.
Well, yep. I've lots of questions I want to ask you, but real quickly, why don't you describe what does that look like right now? I know there's a lot that's still in process, but yeah, just what's cool is I think, and the reason I ask this is while your paradigm, this podcast is all about mission and microchurch, and so while your paradigm isn't necessarily microchurch, there are a lot of overlaps with what you're doing, and you to me are the epitome of a missional practitioner. So I would just love, what is that looking like for you and the other missional practitioners there at Clarksburg?
Yeah, so we do, we're not a microchurch. We are a small church. So our congregation is somewhere between 40 and 60 people that participate. And so on the scale of microchurch, we're huge. On the scale of, church sizes, we're very small. But we still have a traditional Sunday morning gathering at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. And people really like that we do that. I've even floated like, hey, what about a different, no, we want to do. But that probably is, that is, and we have worship. We have a Sunday morning teaching, some things that are out of the box when people come and expect it to be a very traditional church is we do a lot of conversations in our service. So there's a lot of like, hey, here's your small group time. Here's your meet your neighbors, have a conversation with them about this, read this. What do you think about that? So there's a lot of conversation during, and honestly, that took a long time for our congregants to get used to when we started to introduce that because we are very much an introverted church. We are also very much a neurodivergent church. So the representation of people in our congregation that have autism or ADHD, both adults and children, is very high. So that's just another interesting thing about our congregation. And so that's what that looks like. But we talk a lot about being sent people, that we are gathered here on Sunday morning, but for the rest of the week, you are sent to the places that you rest, work, and play. And so everything we do kind of follows this rhythm in our church of this idea of being sent. We follow... The Surprise the World. Who wrote that?
Bells.
Yeah, Michael Frost.
Frost. Yeah.
Is that right? So we do the Rule of Life, the Michael Frost Rule of Life, the Surprise the World. So it's bells, bless others, eat with others, listen to the Holy Spirit, learn about Christ, and be sent. So our congregation very much knows that's what we do. All of our our quarterly focus always is one of those bells. And we talk a lot about how we do this collectively as a church, but also you do this as you're in your individual life. So there are parts that are us, but that's going to be 10% of your life. 90% of your life is what you're doing on your own outside of this. So we actually do a congregational impact survey twice a year to sort of measure how are you living out these bells? How is that happening for you? So we do that. And then the other piece that we do is we have this whole part of our church life. We launched this thing called the Clarksburg Yard. And so part of our story is that we recognize Clarksburg is a brand new community. In 2003, there were only 3,000 people in our city. And today there are, 25 years later, there are 46,000 people in our community. So it boomed really quick because in Montgomery County, there's a housing shortage as there is in so many other places. And so the county kind of said, hey, we're going to meet the need and we're going to build all these houses. And they built them all in Clarksburg. And then they didn't build any of the infrastructure to support the houses. So there were no roads, there were no libraries. We didn't have enough schools. We were just a bunch of houses. And so one of the things that we did was we went through this process of sort of trying to understand who Clarksburg is and what the good news of Jesus would be. So we talked about this idea that in Luke 4, Jesus says that he came to proclaim good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoners, and life to the oppressed. And so we kind of said okay, who is in Clarksburg. We went on this discernment journey of who is in Clarksburg and what is good news to them. Because if Jesus really is good news to everybody, like perhaps like a Sunday morning service isn't actually good news to our neighbors. But maybe, and what we found was that what good news really looked like was a gathering space where people actually had opportunities to gather together in Clarksburg. There was something to do in Clarksburg because our experience as living in Clarksburg is everybody works down in DC, and then you get stuck in an hour and a half traffic on the way home, and then you have to pick up your kids, throw them in the car, and you leave Clarksburg because there's no after-school activities for your kids to do. So then you leave there, and then you grab food on the way, and while you're out of Clarksburg, and then you come in, and then everybody just goes to bed, and you do the same thing the next day over and over again. So there's no opportunities to connect. There's no opportunities for our kids. So we just felt like we need to be advocates for this community. So we looked at our assets and we said, hey, we have 10 acres of land that just happened to be what the church had. And we said, what if we use part of this land to actually create space for our neighbors to come together and to have something to do? So we took the land, we started, initially it was like movie nights and trivia nights and things like that. And then we started a farmer's market, and we have Stay Local Saturdays that we're launching this year, which are Saturday market that has like free family activities and stuff like that. Eventually we will launch our coffee shop because there's no coffee in Clarksburg. Like there's no coffee shop.
What a tragedy, yeah.
It is. It's a huge tragedy. So we're launching Coffee Shop, which is dual purpose. Not only is it a place to connect for people, but it also becomes an economic sort of arm for us to continue this ministry and sustain the work that we're doing. So amazingly, this whole vision got traction with our county. And we have actually received about $800,000 in grant money at this point to develop the space and to continue the work that we're doing, because they also were like, yeah, that is needed. And yes, that is good news. And if somebody is doing it, great. So that's just been a really cool part of what our church has begun to be involved in. And it's led to all sorts of like advocacy work and trying to get bikes paths made and lights put on streets and crosswalks happening and like all of those sorts of things that you would never think were missional work. Yeah.
Well, we're going to put a pin in that because we're getting ready to come back to that exact idea. This is one of the reasons I wanted to interview you. But just to kind of to double back, I think a couple of things you said. Number one, anybody listening that is a part of our Renaissance Network knows the bells thing very well. We teach it as well. Surprise the World is a part of our practitioner pathway that we teach. And so if you've never taken that, to plug it, if you're listening to this, we'd love you to go on that journey with us. It's one of the things that we also help kind of create a rule of life around as well, just as Beth was talking about. But beyond that, I think what's really cool about what you're describing is I think there are folks, we've even learned this, if we have micro churches in so many different spots around Greater Boston. And while I'm an urbanist at heart and love, like, I live in a very urban neighborhood. There's a lot going on. It's an old neighborhood. There's a lot going on, and it's pretty hard to think of a problem that someone's not already attempting to meet. And so a lot of the work in my neighborhood is learning to, like, how do I connect across, to link across difference, or connect to build, with other community builders. So that we can accomplish this. But I know that's not true of everybody. And I know we have folks that are going to be listening to this, that they find themselves in places where there are huge things that need to be met and no one's meeting them. And it is the difference of whether or not it's an actual flourishing place as you're describing or not. So I think there's a lot that we're going to be able to kind of unpack there. You kind of mentioned this at the end there, that a lot of what you're doing isn't maybe what you thought would be missional work. And so I would love for you just to like unpack that a little bit more for us of when you first started down the missional road, you read David Bosch and all the other missiologists, which, by the way, we need you to write a book. We have enough white dudes that have written missional books, so we need more. We need more females in the space that we can listen to. But when you first started down this missional road and you read all these authors, many of them bald white dudes like me, I'm guessing this is not what you thought you were going to be doing.
No.
And what about that has surprised you?
So when I first got to the church, I did ask the congregation, like, hey, we want to be involved in the community. We want to be involved in like outreach and serving other people. And like, what do you guys think we should do for that? And their response was, let's go down to DC and work in the soup kitchens. Now, that is needed and necessary and absolutely important to do.
Yep.
The problem is that really felt more like a field trip to me. Like, travel the 18-mile, hour-and-a-half drive to go be with people that we're never going to see again.
Yeah.
And that, I don't think that is what Jesus called us to when he modeled this idea of like putting on flesh and coming into the neighborhood. And so it was kind of trying to figure out, what does it look like to actually be in this space? And when I started to like tell people, hey, let's think differently about this. Like, how can we think differently about this? The response was, but Clarksburg's a rich area. Like, there's no problems in Clarksburg. Now, if you really want to unpack the demographics, like, I would argue that Clarksburg's not as rich of an area. I mean, there are poorer areas for sure. Like, I get that. We are very privileged to be in Clarksburg and all that stuff. But the idea that there's no injustice that's happening in Clarksburg is just simply not true. And so, but it took a while to figure out what that looked like and where it was, because it hid under the varnish of white picket fences and brand new houses that, between you and me, were all slapped up, poorly built, and not followed to code. So there was a lot of like injustice that was happening, in Clarksburg. But, it wasn't, I never thought in all my life I would be at so many county council meetings that I would be showing up to zoning meetings. So this was another thing that another book, I'm trying to figure out, I can't remember whether it was a book on racism and theology. Can't remember which one it was about, which book it was. But it was talking about how if you want to know the injustice that is happening in your community, you need to start going to zoning meetings, because zoning meetings is where injustice gets codified, where it becomes law. And I thought that was fascinating. So right across the street from our church, there was like, if you don't know what these signs look like, again, so much of this is because we're a newly built community. So stuff is being built, whereas in your community, it may look very different. Yeah. But there was this white sign that said like community public hearing happening. There's a community. There was a new neighborhood that was going to be going up across the street from our church. Come to the high school at such and such date to discuss with the developers your concerns or whatever. And I was like, you know what? Let me try this. Let me see what this looks like. This idea that injustice is being codified at zoning meetings. Let me go see what this looks like. Okay, so I show up and I have no idea what to expect. I don't know what this is. The developer has these blueprints and it looks like a good plan. I don't know what I'm looking for. And there's this woman that shows up. She's an elderly woman. And she was she has her own set of blueprints. And she rolls them out. And I'm like, who's that? Who's that lady? So it's this woman named Kathy. And Kathy actually was a part of the original master plan for Clarksburg. And she was a part of the group that came up with the whole thing. She's now 87. And she's still showing up at zoning meetings, because the truth is all of these developers are developing the city outside of what the master plan said. The master plan, which was written in 1994, was this beautiful, beautiful plan for how Clarksburg could be this walkable city that would be socioeconomically diverse, culturally diverse, that had these beautification sites and preserve the waterways and all of these different things. And basically the county sold the land and the development rights to the highest bidder, to the point that there's communities in our town that the roads are developed too narrow for fire trucks to get through. And so as a result, some of our community has caught on fire, and then it has continued to burn through the whole community because the fire trucks can't get there in time. So she was just like on a tirade about, how dare you? That's not what this is supposed to be. So I learned a ton from Kathy. And you could have written her off as like an angry white woman. But the reality is she was trying to be an advocate for the place that she knew was supposed to be beautiful and supposed to be a place where people thrived. And it had been sold off for the highest developer with the most amount of houses in order to create great tax revenue for our county. But the thing is that then that county, that tax money was then spent down county in a different part of the county and not reinvested in the very place that it was supposed to be. So this was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge injustice. We pay higher taxes than the other parts of the county and yet get less for them. So again, like there are other parts of the county that have injustice stuff happening. So I'm not like being like, we are but I am saying I never would have thought that is where I would have found sort of, I don't know, the dark spaces where God is trying to say, join me in the kingdom of heaven moving into earth. I never would have thought that that's where I would have been. So that was kind of the beginning of it.
Well, I love what you're describing. And I think, even as you're talking, I think it's one of the lessons that I've learned on the journey I've been on. I think so many others do too, is I think it's really easy to see someone else's missional story, to read a book, to see some reel on Instagram, to read a Substack blog, and to glamorize what this journey is. And at the end of the day, if we're actually going to love our places, I think, again, so many people have said all missional theology is contextual. I have to apply some of the rules of what incarnational ministry looks like to where I'm at. And so, sometimes, that's, it's going to look different. And it's not going to always be in some urban slum or doing some, incredible reconciliation work or something like that. And as important as those are, in other contexts, those will be, there. But sometimes it's, I'm going to have to sit at zoning meetings and advocate for sidewalks and lampposts and lights. And
that's right.
I just a couple of weeks ago, a little anecdote in our community, we have been debating whether or not to continue to let there be jersey barriers in front of restaurants in one of our restaurant rows. And, there's been a lot of folks that are like, COVID's over. This is silly. Why are we still doing this? And, a lot of the conversation was all around economics of, does this help restaurants? Does this not help other businesses? And that was basically the end of the conversation. And one of the things that I was messaging my local city officials about was like, come sit at the cafe with me that I help own and watch the human connections that I've not heard a single person. We know we're dealing with a loneliness epidemic that's on the rise. We know there's a mental health thing going on. We know people are continuing to isolate. Why would we get rid of a program that allows neighbors to run into each other accidentally, that allows us to actually rub shoulders and to have those unintended meetups that we never. So those are the sorts of things. Again, a couple of years ago, I never thought I would the idea of me messaging my local city official was so far removed from me. I would have been horrified at the thought that I would even would care. But now it's like, no, I need to use what little agency I have for something like this, because I think this actually makes our neighborhood a more flourishing place. And promotes the kind of human connection that I think God designed us for. So why would I not be advocating for that in my place? So I hear a lot of the same things. I would love for you to kind of reflect on that. Like, my guess is I've had these thoughts, and I don't want to like put them in your head, but there's a lot of gritty, fun parts to this that you you just have to, like, at times you lose yourself. Like, you're so down, like you start going down, and at least for me, I got really excited, and then I got a few years into it, and I'm like, and I know you still get to preach some, but I was like, I used to, like, almost like you were talking with youth ministry, like, I used to be really good at what I did. Like, lots of people patted me on the back. I felt really good about myself. And now I feel like I'm totally dealing with imposter syndrome all the time. Yeah. And it sucks. It is such hard work. It's unglamorous. No one's telling me I'm doing a good job. No one knows how to celebrate my story. Am I just crazy? Have I, like, just completely missed the boat? Am I wasting my life? So I would love for you to just reflect. I don't want to, like, again, extrapolate my internal wrestlings on you, but I'm having a feeling that you've probably had similar things. I would just love for you to, like, what keeps you in the game when you have those thoughts?
I mean, okay, so first of all, when we've had conversations, like we've had phone calls or whatever, I realize that I'm a bit of a downer, especially like when I'm talking to other practitioners. Like I let my hair down and I'm like, this sucks. It's so boring. This person hates me. Like, oh my gosh, the amount of, like, enemies, I don't want to say enemies, but, like, the amount of people, I shouldn't say the amount of people, the amount of Facebook posts that I get that are negatively about me because I am advocating for the library to be in a different place than where it helps their property value is just silly. Like, it's just silly. But there's, like, a lot of, like, it's really hard. And you're absolutely right. Nobody is singing your praises, being like, way to go on your library letter writing campaign that you did. Like, nobody cares. Yeah. And yet, when the library is finally going to be built, everyone's going to be happy about it, but nobody's going to put my name on the library. You
don't even get, like, a little brick in the walkway? Like,
no, there's not going to be a little brick in the walkway for me. And but so seriously, Drew, like, I, to some degree, have had to wrestle with that. And I actually think that has been a part of my discipleship journey. Because, like you said, at the old church, everyone loved me. Everyone sang my praises. Everyone kept giving me, oh, you're so great, so great, so great. And that's not actually what Jesus calls us to. Like, that's not the example of what Jesus did. I mean, there were moments where people loved Jesus, and then there were all the other moments where they hated him and were throwing rocks at him and trying to ride him out of town on a rail and throw him over a cliff. And, like, so, like, I just am kind of like, well, that's that. Now, I will say that the people that I work alongside with in the advocacy stuff, they see me as a very hopeful person. They see me as somebody who's, like, internally optimistic about, like, yeah, the county has ignored us for years, but this time around, they're going to love this. Like, they're going to go for it. They're going to listen, right? We can do it. The community will rise. So they see me as very hopeful. And I think that, you know, one way to stay in the game is to have the people you can gripe with. To have the people who really understand that you're not backing out of the game just because you took an L on something. But then to know who it is that you can continue to be hopeful with. And I wouldn't say that that's a false hope. Like, that's not a false hope for me. It is a hope that is rooted in the kingdom of God. Like, it's hope that is rooted in the fact that Jesus declared that the kingdom of heaven is now here. And if that is true, then all I need to do is continue to participate in the work that Jesus calls us to, and that kingdom will be made manifest and will become visible to people. And so, like, I don't really get to control when and how all of these things happen and how these victories come. But I'm just going to keep in the process. But I do have those days where I'm just like, you know, I could just go back to being a pastor that only cares about my members and, like, just do Bible studies and really great sermons. And, like, why do I care so much about this? Why do I care so much? And I think, again, that is where I think that the Holy Spirit has like gotten into me, right? So I love, one of my favorite parables is the parable of the mustard seed in Matthew 13, where it's kind of like, hey, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, and it gets planted and then it takes over everything and it just gets so big, but then birds come and nest in its branches. And I really feel like that missional kingdom entrepreneurship, like drive to just keep going after things, like it has been planted in me, and it has gotten so big that I now live in it. Like, I'm not quite sure that I can sever myself from all of those things. Although sometimes, like, I hear about like communal, like planned communities, like on the Oregon coast, and I'm like, oh my gosh, let's just cut ties and go there. Like, let's do it. Everything's already built perfectly and it's walkable, and there's transportation, all that kind of stuff.
I think I've seen that Instagram of that same community in Oregon and thought that place looks amazing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, where everybody's yards back up to like green areas.
Yes.
They share. Yeah, I've seen.
Yes, and they share assets and I'm just like, there's like fruit trees growing. I'm like, yes, please. So I think that what keeps me in the game is actually just being rooted with the other people, and remembering that this is it's actually not about public transit, and it's not about the library, and it's not about sidewalks or whatever. It's about the people who live here, and it's about these people that God loves. And I think that missional thing has, gotten in me. I don't know.
Well, you've kind of referred to this. I'd love for you to maybe walk it out a bit further. What is, like, not that we define our lives completely by metrics, but like what keeps you going? Like, what are your, I mean, obviously you kind of refer to it there, but in comparison to what you used to do, and you're doing something totally different. You're taking these L's you're talking about over and over again sometimes. I think any of us, we're all meaning-making machines. We have those moments where we look ourselves in the mirror and we're like, what am I giving my life to? What am I giving my time to? So, like, what is your metrics now that kind of, you look at and you're like, I know it might be small, but this is how I'm making progress, or that I'm doing something that matters.
Like, I don't know. I mean, so from a organizational standpoint, we have metrics in terms of like the number of dollars that were given outside of our organization, the number of hours our staff has worked on projects that don't have, like, that are missional oriented or outreach oriented. And so we have those how many, we have metrics like how many students we have engaged from the community in service learning hours is what we call them, but volunteer projects. We have the number of people who have come to the yard and participated in the yard programming. And we have the number of businesses that we have, because of the farmers market and the market and things like that, the number of businesses that we have helped, hopefully, like, sustain, launch, support through the programming that we have. So we have those metrics. I don't know that those metrics make me feel like, we hit. I mean, I do feel really good about them. But, okay, so I'll brag on this one a little bit. Like, we had a grant that we received, and so we have to report our grant funding numbers. Like, we have to report, like, what we did with the money. And so in our most recent report, we were able to say that we served like over 8,000 people in the community.
That's cool.
And if you think about that, like, our church of 45 to 60 people served 8,000 people in our community. Like, that's, and that's like, so we have this little ice cream truck, and we estimate that there were probably about 10,000 more that came and visited the ice cream truck over the year. So we're hitting like 18,000 people that are coming to our property. And so, like, those numbers are great. I would say that the better numbers, the better things that make me feel like, tick the box, like, metric hit, is actually, I was at my kid's school the other day for one of their, like, banquet things, but there was the little kids cheerleading was practicing in the hallway outside of where the banquet was. And on the way out, I saw two of the people that were there, and they were like, "Oh, Beth," they know me from the ice cream yard, or the Clarksburg yard, the ice cream truck that's there is the ice cream yard. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, Beth, we are all headed over to the ice cream yard. Like, we were just talking about it and we all want to go. We're so excited that it's open again. So it was kind of like, yeah, that's awesome. So the fact that there's sort of like a place for these families to go that support a local minority women-owned business within Clarksburg, and they don't have to go to the next town over in order to do it, like, that's a huge win. Then the other day, so one of the advocacy projects that we just got completed was there was a bike path that was installed in front of our church that connects our community and the local high school and middle school. And when that was put in 4 years ago, all of our high school students, middle school students had to start walking that bike path. The problem is that they put in the infrastructure for lights to be on that bike path, but never actually put in the lights. And it turns out that it was an oversight between the county and the utility company. The county had paid the utility company and signed off on the project, but nobody actually came up to inspect to make sure that it was completed. So we started doing these advocacy walks, and we got a bunch of people like and pointed out like, here's the things that aren't happening in our community and should be. And then the kids all that go on the advocacy walk invite like a letter to the council saying, we want these lights. Like, why didn't you put up these lights? So we started sending those within, so that was back in September. Finally, we got the lights put in last month. And when I see the kids walking to school in the light rather than the darkness, that makes me so happy. When they were first installed, we kept seeing people walk on the bike path and stop to take pictures of the lights that had been installed. And I'm like, come on.
That's very cool.
Yes. And so we may have lost, like, there's other projects that the county said no to. But we got our lights, and like, okay, let's keep going. Now we need a crosswalk. We need a crosswalk to get from this one community that is still required to walk to the high school, but has no access, like safe access, to cross this major thoroughfare through our town to get to the sidewalk. So, I don't know. All of this stuff, none of this stuff is glamorous, but this is the stuff that I'm like, that matters. And part of it is, you know why I want the crosswalk? I want the crosswalk because I know Mary lives in the community right there, and she has trouble crossing the street to get to school. And I've seen Mary cross the street, and it looks like she can get hit by a car one day. And I don't want her to get hit by a car, and so we need a crosswalk, like, get a crosswalk for Mary. Yeah. So I think that's the other part, is that it's not theoretical. I could care less. Honestly, Drew, I love Waltham. Like, yay, Waltham. I wouldn't do any of this for Waltham. It's because I love Clarksburg, and I love the people in Clarksburg. And so that's really where that, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it's wonderful. And I just even you can see it. Like, I identify with this journey, and it's just a warning to anybody else that goes down this path. You just, there's things you start caring about, like you're saying, because you care about the people. You start caring about lights and stroads and crosswalks, things that you're like, how did I find myself here? Right. But you realize, like, we are embodied people, we're embodied creatures, and our lived environments actually impact a lot of how we get to know each other and what the kind of things that God can actually do. And so we start caring about our built environments in ways that we never would have thought of. I would be fascinated, as you think about how you've talked about all this to your congregation. I think there's folks, I know this has been my experience, that have stepped into our network or start going down this path, and they start getting told, like, this is not what God would have you do. You should just be focused on evangelizing people all the time, and you're not doing that. Yeah. And so what has it been like to talk about this in your context, in your paradigm, and how, like, I'm sure there's been some dissenters, but what has it been like to see people get on board with this? What is the kind of language you use to start to have a larger imagination for God's work besides walking someone through the Romans Road?
Yeah. Ooh, Romans Road. It's funny because
Did you twitch a little bit when I said that? Yeah.
Okay. No, that's another. Okay. Back to the question at hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I first started this, I actually felt very concerned about how much time I was investing outside the walls of the church. Our board, who, again, we have a little bit of a strange structure because we're a part of this other, like legally we're a part of this other larger church, but we very much make ministerial choices independently of them, but I'm still accountable to them. And so when we would meet for our board meetings, I would need to do sort of like a report of like what I had been working on. And I was so nervous about like telling them, hey, like 50% of my time is like doing this. Like, are you okay with that? Are we? And I kept like, and they kept being like, Beth, like, here's the deal. You have a lot of capacity. Your church is very small, which then I began to see that as like actually a gift from God, that it's because my church is small that I'm able to have the capacity to do some of this stuff. If my church was huge, it would just be a different sort of thing to figure out. But they were like, your church is small, you have huge capacity, you're trying to figure out where to pull the levers, like go for it. And so I was like, great. I think that their expectation was that it would result in congregational growth much faster than it has. And I'll be honest, I still am somewhat disappointed by that. I do not do this so that people will come to my church. Like, I just want to be really clear about that. I'm not doing this. I'm doing this because I think this is what God has called us to do as followers of Christ. Like, this is where the Spirit has led us. Would I love for them to also know the name of Jesus and like worship with us in the congregation? Absolutely, I would love that. But it is in no way a manipulative, thing. And I think you have to wrestle with that, because I think that part of the concession at the beginning to let me do this was so that the congregation would grow. And then when it didn't result in growth, it was kind of like, are you sure this is where we're supposed to be? And I think that that's where it's taken some opportunity to talk about, hey, this really does matter. But I think that people that say, is this really like Jesus's work? Is this really what the church is supposed to be doing? I actually think that people would have said that about Jesus's early ministry also. Right? Like, hindsight's 2020, and they're like, of course that's what Jesus would do. But in the moment, I'm sure the disciples were like, why are we feeding these people? They're on this side of the Decapolis. Like, this isn't the people we're supposed to be feeding. Why are we stopping for the bleeding woman? Like, the scribe's daughter is sick. Why are you touching those people with leprosy? Like, you could get leprosy and it could compromise everything you're trying to do in ministry. And I think what that reveals is that we have a very poor imagination for what the kingdom looks like. Now that Jesus has done those things, then we're like, well, if I have gloves on, then maybe I'll work with the poor, right? But and I think it goes back to this idea of when Jesus said, if for those, the good news for those in prison is freedom, and trying to understand, well, who are the people that I am being called to serve, and what is good news to them, and that's what I'm going to do. So I would never say that building like a privately owned public community space is the right thing for someone else. That I don't know that that's what everybody's supposed to do, but based on our context and our community, that's what we were supposed to do. And I think that kingdom imagination for what God is leading you to, I think starts with trying to get to know your people, trying to get to know the people that you're called to, and the people that you are called to serve. And then from there, beginning to follow the Spirit and being like, God, like, I am willing to let go of the things that build me up, and the things that make me feel good, and the things that like other people will pat me on the back for. And I'm going to go do the thing that you're calling me to do. So the cool thing is, even just a couple weeks ago, we did a justice and advocacy walk with the people in our congregation. And a lot of the people in our congregation, they're aware that I'm very involved, that I do this kind of thing. But I realized that there was actually a gap that was growing where we talked about being sent and being involved in this type of work. But more and more, it was really me doing the work. And they were kind of like, yay, Beth, keep going. We'll be back. We're good until you get back, right? And I realized like I wanted them to be more informed about what was happening and why it was happening. So we did a justice and advocacy walk. I took the congregation, a portion of the congregation, like around Clarksburg, and sort of talked about these different projects that we had been working on and why they were valuable and what they looked like, so that they could get involved, but also so that they could begin to think in their own communities, what is the injustices that are happening? And we sort of like outlined a process of like how to figure out what God might be doing and how he might be inviting you to join him. So there's one woman who's actually a vet, so she loves dogs. She knows that on Facebook, everyone in her community complains about the dog poop all the time, that people are not picking up their dog poop. And she said, you know what would be good news to my neighborhood would be picking up this dog poop. So as she walked her dogs around the neighborhood, she would just pick up dog poop anywhere that she found it. Now, is that what Jesus wants us to do? I think so. Like, what a great, and who knows like where that's going to lead and what that's going to look like. But I think that sometimes we poo-poo these ideas of what God might be calling people into, and maybe that is her first zoning meeting, that where she begins to learn like, oh, what does this look like? And I am definitely a person that's not like, hey, just smile more at people at the grocery store and that's the work of Jesus. Like I think that's a crock. Like I think that's dumb. You need to be doing more. But I don't know. Does that answer your question, Drew? I
think it totally does. No, I think I love what you're describing. And as you were talking, what came to mind to me, and I've had these thoughts before, is, as someone who's fundraised and has seen mission work both internationally and domestically, the weird dualism that we seem to operate with, the dissonance there, that Christians seem quite okay flying over a body of water to another continent and being a part of, work that just makes life better for the people that live there. And they never think twice about it. And they're like, this is amazing. Even if they walk into a church building in Kenya or Haiti or Guatemala, and it might be small. And it's like, like that, they don't take a crowd shot and think, if this place isn't packed with 400 people or 1,000 people, then everything I just flew over here to do is worthless.
Right.
And yet there's this weird dissonance where we show up in our own places. And part of it is, I know economically some of our places are way more advanced and the felt needs are, like you're talking about, harder to figure out. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that there isn't work that needs to be done there to make our neighborhoods look more like heaven than earth, and to fill in gaps. And then beyond that, I think even what you're describing, and you're not really naming this, but I think of Steve McDowell, who's also on our board at Renaissance, talks a lot about how do we just become characters in the drama of the story that's being told in our neighborhood, in our place. And for some of us, this work allows that to happen, where we kind of find ourselves in the intersection of that story. And what God does with that, we have no control over the outputs. That's why I love even the metrics you were naming earlier. Almost all of them are input metrics. Like, we can only control what we're putting in and what we're investing, and ultimately trusting that God's going to do something with that in the story that he's telling. And we hope, yes, we want more people to find Jesus, but we also have no way of knowing completely the ways that God's using our efforts and our care for him. So I think what you're describing, is such a great example of all of that. I think people listening are going to get that. And I would love for you maybe to just maybe talk briefly about what advice would you give? I think a lot of us glamorize the missional life. I think we both know. I know lots of people that have gone down this road and they give it a go for 3 years. Yeah. And because it doesn't lead to the exact thing, again, it was a bait and switch for them. I'm only doing this to produce X. And I thought this was the new silver bullet that was going to make that happen. Yeah. And it doesn't happen, and they give up. And then it'll be like, well, that thing doesn't work. And it's like, did it? Or did you just give up, because it was so, Or on the flip side, I have so many people that I know that like maybe for one reason or another they struck gold and it was so awesome for like 3 years, and then they parlay it into like a speaking career, and they tell everybody about what they did for 3 years. And I'm always just like, what did you do? Like, what would happen on year 15 if you weren't on the speaking tour still doing the work? And so I would just like, what advice would you give, as we often glamorize this, only to find that it's fraught with hard work, small victories. Even hearing you talk, kind of mining where God's at work in the midst of all this. So what advice would you offer to others in their places as they go down the road that you've been walking now for a decade?
I remember when I was in Phoenix, I was there for 7 years, and I thought, wow, I have invested so much time. And now I've been at Clarksburg for 10, and I'm like, I just got here. And some of that is just like being older and, you know, whatever that, like the law of fractions, that as you get older, like a year is just so fast. But I would say I also had the expectation that my stint in Clarksburg would be a flyover. It was a bridge to, you know, I was a big fish in a medium-sized pond, so then I was going to become a big fish in a small pond that would then get me to the head position of a larger church. Like that was kind of the, here I go. I'm going to, you know, get my reps in, call myself a lead pastor, and then go on to somewhere else. And there were actually several factors that God made very clear that was just not going to happen, and I was going to have to figure out how to settle in. So, and I am so incredibly grateful for that, because I would say there's something about the longevity of a place that it just gets sweeter over time. And I know you've experienced that too. That, you know, and yeah, we've talked about this before, but my dad was in the Army. So growing up, we did not stay in a lot of places for very long. So I was very used to just like up and moving and keep going. And, but there's something about cultivating history at a place where I think only through staying in a place for a long time can you really begin to imagine the potential of things. The other piece is, this kind of stuff is slow work, right? It took 6 months to get some streetlights put in. Like, if you're only going to stay somewhere for 18 months, you're not even going to learn who the players are in order to know who to even call or who to advocate or who to say, hey, can you give me a letter of introduction? I think there's something about, you know, as much as we did say like, hey, nobody's patting me on the back for this work, when I call the Montgomery County Planning Board, like they kind of know who I am now. So, I mean, they're not patting me on the back, but they do know, oh, this is Beth. She's in Clarksburg. Like, she's not going to give up. And I think that there's something about that can only be, that can only happen when you stay in a place and you sort of cultivate sort of longevity in that place. But not only the good of the place, I would also say there are things that God has taught me about who God is, by having to remain in the same location for a long period of time. I have learned, what does it look like to be patient, like really patient, how to trust and just allow myself to dig into a space and not fret about, well, when is this going to happen, but just recognize that God will come through, and that when doors close and there are barricades in front of me, that like I just want to throw a tantrum and be like, why not? Why not? Why not? But instead, like what I have found is oftentimes when that happens, God is saying you need to go back to the quiet place, and there's something that you haven't figured out yet about where I'm trying to lead you. You're going in the wrong direction, and it's not until you sit with this for a little bit that you will figure out you're actually supposed to turn, 4 degrees to the right, or you haven't met this person yet, and it's gonna change what it is that you're doing. Because the number of times that has happened is just, I don't know. I think that is what I would say is sit tight in the place that you are. It's so tempting to think bigger and better is where the kingdom of God is at. And in reality, God, Sermon on the Mount, right? Like, it's the poor in spirit. It's the peacemakers. It's the down and out. It's the people who are persecuted. Like, you need to go to the quiet, still spaces, the dark, forgotten places in order to see God move in the kingdom, because there's something about letting go of your power and surrendering that God's like, perfect. That's the soil that I do something in. And I think that we only get to that powerless place when we stop and stay and realize, I'm just going to sit tight here for a little while because I got nothing else to do. Like, I've got no more cards to play. So until God very clearly says, you need to move, stay in the place that you are. I guess that would be my recommendation.
Well, I love what you're describing, because I think it was something that there was a handful of us, in our Renaissance story, that kind of all started down this path about the same time. And we had several micro churches that kind of launched out of that. And I think I've often been guilty of idealism and have been told that by many people around me. But I think all of us kind of came in wide-eyed and very excited, thinking, what is this going to do, and what are the results going to be? And I think so many of us had a mindset of, this is what we're going to accomplish because we're doing this. And I don't think almost any of us stopped and said, this is what God's going to be doing in me because I go on this journey. And so that's what I think the missional mindset, I was so busy thinking about what I was going to produce, I never thought about my own heart. And almost what you're describing, I think so many folks that I know in the initial kind of wave of Renaissance would say, this has been a discipleship journey for me. Like,
that's right.
I know God better because I've gone down this road, and I've learned lessons I would have never learned had I not gone down this about my faith. And I hear you echoing a lot of that, because it's fun. And I don't think there's enough people that talk about it that, like, it's always just like, this is a better way to do church, or this is a better way to do X or Y, or to produce some measurable outcome, rather than just saying, like, yes, well, I think what you said, this is what Jesus is calling us to do. This is what the Spirit's doing. And these are the kind of people we're going to become in the process of joining the Spirit there. And then God gets to do what he does. I think, man, like, I don't know. That just sounds, that sounds good news to me. That sounds like something I would want to keep doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I was sharing with a friend of mine who's just beginning this process out in Portland, and I was telling her, she was like, what would you tell my leaders about this whole thing? And I said, if you choose to do this, you will be a different person at the end of it. Your faith will be radically different. I think that there is this thing that happens in the church world. Certainly I experienced it with people, congregants, when we were in Phoenix. It's sort of this idea of, like, the congregation complaining that you're not going deep enough for them. Like, that they really want to dig deeper into their faith. Will you please just teach deeper? Like, go deeper. And I remember just being like, you're not living out the stuff that I am talking to you about. Like, what do you mean deeper? I want more theology. I want more, I just feel so bored in my faith. And I think what I have learned is that the reason I think Christians feel that, particularly in the American Western Church, is because they don't do anything with their faith. Like, I think we have gotten fat on this diet of, like, theological information. And that's what we think depth of faith is. But I actually think depth of faith is, like, being transformed by living out these things. Being transformed by really doing what Jesus said in loving our neighbor. And recognizing that the kingdom of heaven is here on earth, and then like living like citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Like that's actually what the deeper is. But then when you talk about that, people are like, I don't really want to do that. But if you have a group of people that are all doing that Monday through Saturday, and they come together on Sunday morning at church or micro church or whenever that is, like you come up, then you guys are hungry for the word of God, and you want to worship, and you want to be in the presence of this God who like is gonna have to show up because you don't know how you're gonna get that crosswalk, and it has to show up because you don't know how you're going to get the money, or has to show up because you are about to kick down the doors at the city council meeting and you need some patience or whatever the thing is. I think that that's where, I don't know, things start to shift in our own faith. And I think that makes us people that look like the kingdom. And that's how then the kingdom comes. So I don't know. That's what we're doing over here in Clarksburg.
I think this is so beautiful. Well, I think it's cool to hear you like still mid journey, because, you know, I was thinking as you were talking so much about the, some of the things that have already happened, about the kind of, whether or not anyone's patting you on the back, the kind of legacy that you're going to create, and because of the things you've advocated for, the kind of built environments you've created, the ways that you've allowed people to be seen and connected, and how valuable that is. And, how much so many of us minimize those stories and what it could look like to continue to live in faithfulness. So I think it's awesome. And we need to wrap up. We're kind of getting to the end of time, but I have to say, for anyone who's listening, like Beth's one of my favorite communicators. You could easily be speaking. I've heard you speak many times. You could easily be on the stage of huge churches. You could easily be working for some parachurch organization where you're traveling the country speaking at conferences and having packed rooms because people would want to listen to what you're having to say. And yet you're rolling up your sleeves and doing some of the most unglamorous work. And I just so admire that we need more people to do the thing and not talk about the thing. And like, what an example. I'm inspired every time I talk to you. You're talking about being a downer, but I don't ever leave thinking that. I always leave thinking like, she loves her place so much that she's disappointed, even when and I think that's what I always leave. Like, my goodness, like, I think if you cut Beth open, she would just bleed Clarksburg. And I think I always, that's always what I think. I was like, I want that to be my legacy too. That like,
Nothing's true.
I represent, I'm where I'm at, that people know that I care deeply for my place and the people that live there. And so, hopefully others are inspired by it, but thank you for your time and, sharing just a bit of your story with us. And hopefully we can have you back again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drew, so much. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be walking with you.
Well, thank you everyone else for joining us. We can't wait to continue this podcast journey with you and walk through the realities of following God in the everyday. If you want to find out more about the Renaissance Network, from our microchurches to future cohorts you could join, head to wearerenaissance.org. And with that said, bye.